have breaking news, sad breaking news. This morning, music icon Tony Bennett has died at the age of 96. Chloe Melas joins us now. And Chloe, legend feels like an understatement to some degree when you talk about Tony Bennett. What more can you tell us?
Yes, I mean, incredibly sad news for people all over the world this morning. Tony Bennett has died at the age of 96. His publicist, Sylvia Weiner, his longtime publicist, confirming this morning. And, this comes as a shock to many. He lived a long, beautiful life. I had the honor of meeting him when he turned 90 and performed in New York at the Rainbow Room. We don't know the circumstances of his death, but we know that he had been battling Alzheimer's for the past several years. His wife, Susan Bennett, she actually told AARP magazine in 2021 that despite the Alzheimer's, he was continuing to perform, put out music. Obviously we know that he toured and put out albums with Lady Gaga. I've reached out to her, and I'm sure that this is obviously a devastating loss for her. They were just so close. But his career spanned decades, from the early 1950s. And Frank Sinatra is someone who touted him as one of the greatest voices of a generation. And so meeting Tony Bennett, there's just nothing like it. And he was so charismatic, so kind, and just obviously so talented. And so it's a very sad day for everyone who had the pleasure of meeting him, knowing him, or just loving his music, to know that he has passed at his home in New York at the age of 96.
Yeah, and this is a legend, really, whose career spans many, many decades, going all the way back to the 1940s. And as you were talking, Chloe, we were playing some of that video of Tony Bennett as he was making one of his last performances, maybe even the last, with Lady Gaga. He was able to, even in his final years, as he was battling Alzheimer's, still perform and really give the audience what they've always loved about him, which is his ability to perform music. And Lady Gaga really kind of identified with him, bringing him in to this modern era. We actually have with us now Anderson Cooper on the phone. Anderson, you've spent some time with Tony Bennett. What are you thinking about today as we mark his passing?
Well, it just, what an extraordinary life. I had the honor of doing a profile of Tony and his wife, Susan, for 60 Minutes when he did his final shows with Lady Gaga that you were just talking about. And I got to spend a significant amount of time with him. I was in his apartment watching him rehearse with his longtime accompanist. He has lived just an extraordinary, epic life. There's a lot of people who don't know a lot of the details of his life. His service during service to the country during the war. He was an early artist involved in the civil rights movement in a very serious way, marching, performing. He sacrificed a lot over the years for that. But I think his most extraordinary performances, the last three performances that he did at Radio City with Lady Gaga, I think everybody who was there knew that they were witnessing something really just incredible. That this man who much of his memory was gone, when I was interviewing him, I would be talking to him, and he would not remember what he had just said. He would not remember certainly who I was sitting there talking to him. But his wife, Susan, all during COVID, kept him engaged, kept him alive, and kept him Tony Bennett. And in the end, Tony Bennett knew who Tony Bennett was when Alzheimer's had robbed him of many of his memories of his extraordinary life. He knew inherently in his mind still that he was Tony Bennett. And when that music started to play, you could see him transforming into Tony Bennett once again. And I stood there by the piano in his apartment while he was rehearsing and I just interviewed him, and it had been a very difficult interview because he could only say a few sentences, and clearly didn't, really know why we were there. But as soon as his piano player started playing a few bars, he trotted up to the piano with this incredible energy, put his elbow on the piano, and he just launched into an hour-long set of all his greatest hits without any sheet music, nothing. It was all from memory, and it was all so and it was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life to stand there and watch it. And suddenly, while he was singing, because I was standing by the piano with him, he was looking at me and relating to me as Tony Bennett. And if I didn't know better, I would have thought he knew exactly who I was and why I was there, and he was engaging with me in a way through the music that he couldn't do in any other way. So it's a sad day, of course. We've all lost one of the great artists of our time, and yet what a triumphant life. And to have sent this, the message that he sent to so many families out there who have people, loved ones with Alzheimer's, this message of hope and this message of possibility, that he could still have a vibrant life because of the love of his wife Susan, his son Danny, all his kids. And I'll never forget the last performance that I had the privilege of being at backstage with him at Radio City Music Hall. Just a short time before he went on, he was in the back and he turned to Susan and he didn't know exactly where he was. And he said, what are we doing? And she said, you're performing tonight in like 10 minutes. And he said, great. And she said, let's go over the set. And he said, great. And she did. They went over what numbers he was going to do. He went back. He went to stand in the wings. I was standing there with him. And he was watching Lady Gaga perform on stage because he did a set and she did a set. And then he would come out at the end and she would come out at a certain point with him. And watching Lady Gaga, you could see like the music just flowing into him, and he started tapping his feet and clicking his fingers together. He went out, he killed it out there. He went out there with his first words, like the crowd just erupted. His first words were, wow, and they just loved it. He did his whole set. And then the first two nights when Lady Gaga had come out, he had said like, wow, look who's here, but he hadn't said her name. And I talked to Lady Gaga about it afterward, and she felt that in the moment on the stage, those first two nights, he didn't remember her name. And while they were rehearsing in the weeks leading up to it, she was concerned that he didn't remember her name. But on that final night, when she came out and he turned and he saw her coming out, he said, wow, Lady Gaga. And she burst into tears. I mean, everybody just burst into tears. It was just an extraordinary night. And what a life we have been able to witness and benefit from over all these decades.
Yeah. Anderson, CNN has now confirmed that Tony Bennett has died. We're expecting a statement shortly. That 60 piece that you did, Anderson, was so incredibly poignant. And I remember when, Lady Gaga was kind of describing that, like it was almost like a switch flipped, and then you demonstrated it. We also made a great point, the life lived. We've only got about a minute and a half left. Civil rights in particular, obviously his military service. Can you capture what he was, not just those last performances, but just overall?
Look, this was a kid who, didn't have much when he was born and had a family that loved him and that supported him. But he created who he was. And he was all about music from the beginning to the end. And, his son Danny was an incredible manager for him. Reintroduced him to whole new generations of people over the decades in the 1980s and the 1990s, doing duets with some of the greatest contemporary artists of the day. And you can't talk about Tony Bennett without talking about Susan, his wife, who loved him her entire life, basically, grew up listening to his music, and was just an incredible, incredible champion and partner in all of this. And my thoughts are certainly with his family today. And with Tony, and he's still good wherever he is. He's still singing, and thank God we have his music and we have his voice, and I'm going to be listening to him today.